Good Monday to you, everybody, in 785. Welcome to week Bam 3. How's everybody doing? You holding up? Oh, hold on here. Delicious. The Griffin of Wales Cup, the country of origin of my family on my father's side. So, Griffin Wales. Okay. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about your material, your readings for this week. I will post the video in which I review the discussion board probably Tuesday or Wednesday, because that gives me, another day or two will give me time to read through your essays, and I'll give you some feedback about that. But as you'll hear me say in that video, suffice to say that, here's how we're going to do this. The first criteria that I will judge your submission on is, does it meet the Fleisch-Kincaid readability standards that I set out for you in the directions? Okay. If it doesn't, I'm going to turn it right back to you, and you must redo it. Now, why is this? Am I trying to make your week miserable? No, I'm not. The reason for it is, I have found in my experience in working in strategic communication in a lot of roles, some in media, some in PR, some in an administrative role, some as head of communication, above and beyond all skills that I've brought to those positions is the ability to communicate concisely and effectively. And frequently, when I've worked in those positions, there are word, tone, and readability limitations set on all publications that exit an organization. That is, there are standards, and I don't mean standards like as in, you have to make sure that you write the party line in our position. That's not what I'm talking about. Standards by way of the formatting of the writing, that everything has to be squeezed through. Everything that's written has to conform to those standards. I've written press releases that have been held up, and I was told to redo because I violated, and some depending on the organization that you go to work for, they can be extremely particular. One organization, I won't mention what, held up and they were not happy. They made me redo a press release because instead of a set of parentheses, I had used 2 commas, which, by way of writing fluency is easier on the eyes and easier to read than a parenthetical note. Bracketing commas. Didn't like it. They held up the press release, forced me to redo it. So meeting that standard of 8.7 or lower, I'm going to hold you to it. It's some of you have emailed me saying, geez, this is really busting my chops. I get it. So if the essay that you turned in, and I'll be loading them into the Fleisch-Kincaid readability link, that is the meter that I sent you. If it's not 8.7 or below, I'll turn it back to you, and I'll give you this week to revise it to get it 8.7 and below. Okay. So in just a second, I'll talk about, I've got a piece I've uploaded to the course content folder for week 3 that I published in a magazine, and I'll talk about what it is and why it is that I wrote it and how I got it down to a level of 8.7. All right, but let's take a look at the readings first. Okay, so for this coming week, you're reading again from Cialdini's, or, that's how I say it in good Italian. Chapter 3. In this chapter, Cialdini is going to stress the importance of paying attention to the process of persuasion and how people react. And there's this great little cartoon that he includes. I think it's on page 20. So this is, this is for week 3. This is in effect week 2 and forward. But anyway, it says, pet psychic, and the owners of the cat are wondering what the cat is thinking. Okay. And the pet psychic is saying, she's thinking how absurdly gullible you two are, to call a pet psychic. Okay. But I want you to pay particular attention to when you get to page 26, and he asked the question, are you adventurous enough to consider a revolutionary model of influence? And then the do's and don'ts of focus. All right. So, because the theme for this week is research. Do your research, both formally and informally, before you begin a PR process, before you begin a PR statement. And then so in Wilson et al., I'll just call this, I'll just refer to this book as Stratcom, or the Strategic Communication. Okay. You're going to take a look, you're going to jump into chapter 3, Communication and Research Methods. And Wilson et al., again, are going to be walking you through, and some of this, by the way, should seem very familiar to you. Okay, some standard modes of research, qualitative versus quantitative. Okay, how to use internet media as a research. I don't mean how to use the internet, but as a research tool, media research. Okay, and focus groups. All right, and then pay particular attention to when you get to page 55 about the use and abuse of focus groups, because I get it. When you're working for an organization, and they're asking a question, whether it's about a product or a process. Let's say you're working for a politician. And they're asking a question about the position of the public on a certain issue. It's tempting on your part, as the head or part of the communication team, to give them an answer, or you might not even be aware that you're doing it, to give them an answer that pushes their confirmation bias button, that confirms what you think they want to know. Beware of designing focus groups that is of having blinders on, having a blind spot on in constructing your focus groups and doing your research. So you're not driven by that desire for confirmation bias, rather than the desire for what's out there, what's the opinion. Okay. And then likewise in and we'll just call it the handbook, you're going to read about research, both formal and informal. Okay. So that's the topic for this week. Those are the things that I want you to focus on. Cialdini, he's much more the person to person's person. Okay. Wilson et al., you're going to find much more in the way of theory and systematic approach and resources. This, I like this book. I picked this book because this is a book that I believe will be useful to you in your role as strategic communicators, whether you're teaching a class or you're heading up an organization. Okay, let's talk about your essays. Now, I've only had a chance to read through a few of them. I've pulled some of them up and run them through the Flesch-Kincaid gauge meter. And of the 3 that I pulled up, all 3 of them did not score 8.7. They scored higher. All right. So I'll email you individually and say, hey, this doesn't hit the score. You got to redo it. Okay. So what's the trick, if you will? What's the secret? Well, let me tell you. I want you to go over to course content folder number for week 3, if you haven't already. And in there, you'll find an article, an essay that I wrote. I published it in a magazine. I don't remember what the word count of it was. I think it's something like, like 1,000 words, somewhere in that neighborhood. But anyway, I did not have as tight of a word restriction as I gave you 500 to 700 words. Okay. But I did have a restriction of a Flesch-Kincaid score that did not exceed 8.7. Okay. So I asked you in, the assignment in this first essay in Blackboard that you get to pick anything that you want. Okay. You get to decide on something that you want to see change and who it is that's involved with changing it. Okay. So change, done more of, done less of, what it is and who's doing more or less or something completely different. That was entirely up to you. It can be hypothetical or it can be something that you really feel needs to be addressed. Okay. Then I wanted you to reflect core beliefs of the standard audience. And this is the strategy driven by the theory that you'll find in chapter 2 of Wilson et al. Strategic Communications. Okay, so I wanted you to reflect on your understanding of the audience's target audience's core beliefs and values. Okay, I wanted you to move them towards the intended behavior by identifying those attitudes without being too obvious or too heavy-handed. Because remember, again, in chapter 2, for week 2 from the Strategic Communication Handbook by Wilson, so that you can't make anybody do anything. Okay. So I said you could write it in any tone of voice that you wanted, first person or any voice that you wanted, first person, second person, I don't care, and any tone that you wanted, formal, informal. That was all up to you. All right. But you have to score 8.7 or below. And you need to make sure that it is, it's free from grammatical, typographical errors. Because again, as I said before, when you have those creep into your writing, you change the subject, and you don't want to change the subject. Okay, so go, if you haven't already, open up the essay that I include in the course content folder, the article that I include for week 3, and I'm going to explain what it is, why I wrote it the way I wrote it, and how I got to a score of 8.7 on the Flesch-Kincaid scale. Okay, so let's start with the essay. Now, I'll tell you from the onset. I wrote this independent of what I, do as your instructor. This is my opinion. You may not agree with me. That's okay. All right. I'll tell you just a little bit about why I wrote the essay the way I did, but this is not. I'm not selling this position to you and explaining this. All right. You're free to disagree with me as you like. Okay. So, my undergraduate background, I was a double major. I have a bachelor's both in science and in the humanities. I got a science degree in biology with a specialty in anatomy and physiology. That is, how the body is put together and how it works. And then in the humanities, I received a degree in language and philosophy and a minor in French and a minor in fine arts. Okay. So for a long, since I was an undergraduate, I've had a head for science, something that interests me. And I've written for scientific publications. I ghost wrote a book with a physician. Lots of empirical research went into that. So this is a space that I spend a lot of time in. As part of my training in the sciences, I spent a lot of time in chemistry and physics. That's just what you have to do. At the time when I was taking the degree, I didn't know if I wanted to go to graduate school or if I wanted to go to medical school. So I prepped for both. Okay. And then I got to choose the one I wanted, and I'm quite happy with my choice. But that's beside the point of the essay. Okay. Again, now this is me. You can disagree. But as someone who's had an extensive background in physics and chemistry, one of the things that's unsettled me, that's bothered me about the green energy movement is how out of step it is with some of the very fundamentals of physics and chemistry. Namely, first of all, excuse me, there is no process, okay, of creation or consumption that does not produce a waste product. Not a single organism on this planet that metabolizes, that is, that brings in nutrients, excuse me, allergy season for me, converts those nutrients into energy. Part of that process is a waste product. That is a product that cannot be utilized by that organism. That's normal. So one of the things that bothered me about the green energy movement, or you can say the environmental movement, I feel like, is the demonization of waste products, as if producing waste is somehow a sin, it's abhorrent, it's ruinous. No, it's not. And specifically, I'll get to the article. One of the waste products that's produced, at least for mammalian life, that's us, is carbon dioxide. Now, if you happen to be a plant, that's good news, because plants breathe in carbon dioxide and then breathe out oxygen. So that's good news for mammalian life, all mammalian life, breathing in oxygen and breathing out CO2. So that's the first thing. That is this sort of notion that just the very byproducts of life are so problematic, that is, that they're actually produced, that there's something wrong with it. Secondly, and more significantly, the energy sources pursued by advocates of this movement, and I realize I'm painting with a broad brush here. Okay, so that's a given. Do not fulfill the goals as set out by the members of the movement that advocate them. What do I mean by that? Okay, solar energy, wind energy, and then electrical energy, which is just energy stored in a battery generated by some means, whether that's solar, wind, or turbine, something turning a turbine. Okay, like say steam from burning coal or anything else. All three of those energy sources, in the aggregate, in the total, produce less energy than the energy sources that the advocates of those energy would have them replace. Now, let me see if I can unpack that a little bit. So, for instance, a solar panel over the course of its life uses more energy to produce the energy that produces than coal does, or natural gas does, or nuclear just kills them all in terms of return. Now, it's impossible an energy source that produces more than it costs to produce it. Okay, what I should say impossible. We haven't figured that out yet. If we can figure that out, this whole debate becomes irrelevant, because then all of our problems are solved. All right, if we have what is a perpetual motion machine, if we have a net positive energy source, happy day. We're not there yet. All right, and we will likely never be, because there's some problems in some of the fundamental physics with that. But anyway, we'll just set that aside. Okay, so if your goal is to produce less waste products, which are just a natural occurrence of production, placing a greater and greater burden for energy production on things like solar and wind produces more waste than keeping that burden on things like coal and natural gas. Because all the components of solar and wind have to be produced through the use of coal or petroleum products, that is, oil refined into a something. So you can't get to the windmill until you manufacture the components of the windmill using the very energy sources you purport that you want to replace. And when you're finished with the windmill, the amount of energy over the course of its lifespan, because it's going to wear out, because again, waste products, how things do, the amount of energy over its lifespan is significantly less than the amount of energy if you had skipped making the windmill and just used the energy that you were using to produce the windmill to produce energy. Okay, so it's a net negative. So how do I get this point across? All right, without the physics and the science, and that leads me to the article. All right, so if you pull that article up, so what I decided to do, I thought, okay, how can I make this point? Okay, and the magazine that I published in asked me if I had something to say on this, and I was talking with the editors. I said, yeah, let me give it a whack. All right, there's something that might be persuasive. I said, okay, let me try, because the readership of the magazine happens to be people that are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. All right. So I said, okay, let me try start with, first of all, an analogy, and this is back to what I said, when you should be aware of the core beliefs and values. So let me start with an analogy that I believe that the readers of the magazine will be familiar with. So I took the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, Germany, right? The guy that shows up and says, "Oh, you got a rat problem? No problem. I got a flute and I'll fix it for you." And he plays the flute and he leads the rats away. And he says, "Okay, now give me a big, huge chunk of money." And the town leaders are like, "Wait, what? We don't remember that." He says, "Oh, okay. Well, you won't pay up." He starts playing his flute again and leads the children out. All right. So I took a bet that the readers, given their age demographic, would be familiar with this fairy tale. And if they weren't super familiar with the storyline, that's how I opened the piece. Was just, let me just tell you a story. Let me relate to you a tale. All right. So I told the story in brief, because, I only got 1,000 words, 700 words in brief, of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. But in telling the story, I made sure to touch on what I knew the readers would know, and by way of experience, not with the fairy tale, but everyday life experience, and what I was trying to get at in the larger point of, everything that we do produces waste. Do things that produce, when it comes to energy, that produce the most energy and the least waste. So in the second paragraph, okay, I say the town council fretted about the rats in the garbage, but avoided having the tough decisions. It should be making the tough decisions. That was an editor's change. Needed to deal with both. All right. So here I'm dropping a seed in their mind. The part of the problem is our leaders just don't want to address the problems that go with normal life, and that's when you produce something, there's a waste to it. That's just the way it is. Okay, so then I tell the story of the Pied Piper. All right, and in telling the story of the Pied Piper, I make sure to point out that the moral of the story was not, somebody can play a pipe so well that he leads rats out of town. The moral of the story, and this isn't me, this is the story, is you need to solve your own problems and not listen to somebody who seems to have a magical solution to solve your problems, because you really don't, you can't get something for nothing. All right, that just doesn't exist. You have to put the work in to get whatever it is you need out. And what happened to the people of Hamelin is that the Pied Piper, because they wouldn't solve their own problems, and they just sort of kicked the can down the road and gave their attention, and they just handed it off to someone with a quick solution. Oh, hey, let me play my flute and I'll take care of the problem. That when leaders don't solve problems, they are they're giving away the future for their children. Because when you don't solve problems now, the next generation is going to have to solve them. All right. And if you hand over problems to people that just seem to have fanciful, magical solutions, you are in effect selling out the future for the next generation. So I wanted to draw that analogy between the piper, and that's the story, the moral of the story. And again, this is my opinion, what I believe that we're doing by putting our time and money into these energy sources. And I'm not saying that one day they won't work. I'm just saying that right now they create more problems than they solve, and that's going to create problems for the next generation. And we're in doing so, we're selling them out. Okay, so then after recalling, I should say, the story of the Pied Piper, then I make the analogy to those who are selling this line of carbon neutral. And by the way, since all life is carbon based, carbon neutral, I don't like the sound of that. But anyway, that in buying into this, we're allowing ourselves to be conned because you don't get anything for nothing. And to demonstrate that point, it's at that point that I roll out what I would call the soft science of the piece. That is, in telling them you get less energy out of this than you do out of that. I'm sorry, it's allergy season for me, and I'm very coughing. And one of the giveaways, I tried to give them something. I tried to sort of start with larger explanations and funnel down to things that I think would be more relatable. Okay. And that is one of the ways you can tell if an energy source is sustainable, that is, will it sustain itself, is does the energy source produce enough energy to produce itself? I mean, that's ultimately what's got to happen. Okay. If oil refined into gasoline didn't produce enough energy to get more oil to refine into more gasoline, then eventually the whole system would collapse. All right. Have you ever seen a powered windmill factory? Have you ever seen a solar powered solar panel factory? Why? Because these energy producers don't produce enough energy to produce themselves. All right. Now, finally, and this is just something I know about American readers and American audiences. Americans like things to do. So if you tell them, hey, here's the problem with this, you set up an analogy, something that taps into things they understand. And so, for instance, threats to their children as a core belief. Don't threaten the children. All right. Then after you explain, well, this is actually what's going on, give them something to do. So if you read the article, I give them a list of things to do. All right. What sort of energy sources should you get behind? Because I spent a lot of the article criticizing those who are presenting various energy sources. Okay, fine. If it's fair for me as a writer to criticize those who promote certain energy sources, what energy sources should people get behind? All right. Then how to approach the question. I don't just leave the question of, what to do with your children. In fact, I want to loop back to that. That's where I start the article with what I know is a core value: protect the children. I want to loop back to that and affirm that value, that is, help the children. And that's what I do as the article ends. All right. Now, this scored 8.7 on the Flesch-Kincaid scale. All right. So it was right on the money. And I have sort of a gauge when I send these, when I publish these articles. That is, how do I know if they're effective or not? How do I know that I'm reaching people? This is not scientific. All right. This is just sort of my rule of thumb that I've developed over the years. Depending on the number, the length, and the tone of the emails that I receive back from readers. Again, this is just from many, many years of doing this. I get a sense of how impactful and persuasive the written piece was. And for this article, I got a flood. All right. And many people ask me, Well, do you know where there's nuclear power initiatives? Or some people even wrote me and said, they're trying to put up windmills right through my state, and I think they look terrible. They look hideous. I don't even know about the power issue. They just look nasty, and birds smack into them. And what do we do about it? All right. So that's my rough gauge. Okay. So take a look at that article. You can run it through the Flash Kincaid module, scorer that I sent you. You'll see it lands at 8.7. What's the I've had some of you write me say, I'm trying to get this thing down and it's driving me mad. What's the secret? Really, there are two things that you can do. I mean, first of all, just learn to write clearer than you did the last time, and more directly than you did the last time. Okay, that's sort of the first step. But in terms of things to do with a piece that you have now that you've written, write sentences with fewer words, use words with fewer syllables. So if you have I try very, very hard to avoid multiple syllabic words, certainly nothing above 3, maybe once in a while at the most, right? Why? People don't retain that information as well, right? I'm not trying to dumb down and write down to the reader. No, I'm trying to write into the mind of the reader. Excuse me. I want them to remember the analogies that I give them. I want to push those core belief and value buttons so they absorb the perspective. They're going to change their own behavior. I'm not going to be able to change their behavior. Many readers, or many people, and I'll use this as an analogy again, and you may or may not agree, but I have met many people that just are, they're just not quite sure about this whole green energy thing. And they don't know why. And part of the reason they don't know why is they don't have the background. All right. I give them the why. I give it to them in a way that I believe they can easily understand and easily remember. Okay. So, I didn't want to give you this essay before because I really want you to do your own thing. Anything you want to advocate for to any audience you like, that's up to you. All right. But if you're having a hard time hitting 8.7 on the Flash Kincaid scale, fewer words, fewer syllables. That will go a long way. I mean, that's assuming you're starting with clear and with writing that is clear and concise. I mean, and you'll read in this piece that I put there, there's some wiggle room. All right. Not every sentence is C-spot run. Okay. You can have some fun. All right. But in the aggregate for the whole piece, straightforward, active voice, clear, fewer words, fewer syllables. All right, everybody. Good luck with this week's material. A video commentary on last week's coming soon, probably Tuesday. Give me a chance to read through more of your essays. All right. And otherwise, have a fantastic week. I will see you on Blackboard. God bless.